The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of tales showcasing different cultures or beliefs that is unique from our perspective. Please sit back and enjoy the tales I am about to tell you. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Black Horse Lake, Great Falls, Montana. While driving along Black Horse Lake near Great Falls, Montana, you may want to be wary of picking up hitchhikers. On your windshield, that is. There have been many stories of the Phantom Hitchhikers, but this one is not your average one. Although many say they have seen this hitchhiking ghost along the road, it has gotten a little more up close and personal in an unusual way with some. What makes this haunting different is that people have reported that suddenly, a man appears on their windshield as if he had just been struck by your vehicle while driving down this stretch of road just off Highway 87 in Cascade County, Montana. Most describe the phantom as an Indian man with long black hair wearing a jeans jacket. Some say he is wearing bib overalls. However, the most common factor in the stories is that he appears on the windshield, and when you pull over and get out, he is not there and there is not a scratch on your vehicle. This same story has been reported over and over throughout the years. Many believe that this is the ghost of a transient Indian man who was wandering along the road at night and was struck by a vehicle which ended his wayfaring ways. Now he roams the road forever and relives his terrifying end over and over. The Miniwashitu. Miniwashitu, also known as the Missouri River Monster, haunts the banks of the river as it courses through North and South Dakota. It is said that in the long ago, there was a mysterious being within the stream of the Missouri River. It was seldom seen by human beings and was most dreadful to see. It is said that sometimes it was seen within the water in the middle of the stream, causing a redness shining like the redness of fire as it passed up the stream against the current with a terrific roaring sound. Though rarely spotted by humans, any sighting of Miniwashitu ends in tragedy. Those who Miniwashitu sees and lets escape with their life are forever haunted by his horrible image and eventually go mad. They will writhe as though in a horrific pain, eventually seeking death to relieve them of their pain and insanity. And it is said that one time, not a very great many years ago, this frightful being was seen by a man, and he told how it appeared. He said that it was of strange form and covered all over with hair like a buffalo, but red in color, and that it had only one eye in the middle of its forehead, and above that, a single horn. Its backbone stood out notched and jagged, like an enormous saw. As soon as the man beheld the awful sight, everything became dark to him, he said. He was just able to reach home, but he lost his reason, and soon after that, he died. Stories of Miniwashitu predate European settlement in America, and stories are still told of him today. Miniwashitu travels upstream in springtime, breaking apart the ice on the Missouri River, keeping those who know of this monster far away from the dangerous banks. The Water Babies of Massacre Rock. Long ago, in Pocatello, Idaho, there is a tragic, frightening spot that became known as the Massacre Rock State Park. A popular belief is that the Native Americans who first inhabited the area went through a harsh famine. The natives decided there wasn't enough food to feed any more people, so mothers were forced to go down to the river and drown their babies as they were born. Other variations of the myth say that this happened among a group of white settlers during the 1800s. It is said after the babies were drowned, they changed and grew fins and gills in order to survive in the water by eating small fish. People have reported seeing these water spirits play in the canals and rivers in the Massacre Rock area. It is even said that these spirits try to lure humans to their death in order to avenge their sad fates. Nowadays, these so-called water babies still make their presence known. If you go to the banks of this river and sit for a while in silence, you will begin to hear the unmistakable sounds of babies crying. It's supposed to be the spirit of those same babies looking for their mothers. Caddy of Cadboro Bay. The Pacific Northwest is no stranger to folklore and unexplained phenomena. Its jutting mountain ranges and dense forests covered in thick moss are like a beacon for tall tales and creepy creatures. And while beasts like Sasquatch and Bigfoot dominate this particular area's mythology, a lesser known and more disturbing one swims along the shores of the Pacific coast. A reported giant sea snake lurking in these coastal waters. Nicknamed Caddy, the Cadborosaurus is essentially a 20-foot mega serpent slithering around the northern part of the west coast. Its head mirrors that of a horse and its body like an overstuffed eel. A long row of ridges protrude from its spine. Web flippers located below the Cadborosaurus' neck and at the base of its tail allow it to glide through the dark, murky waters. In short, think twice before assuming that the slime grazing your feet is just seaweed. The Cadborosaurus isn't new to the Pacific Northwest, though. In fact, it's part of a rich folklore's history in this area, garnering more than 300 eyewitnesses' accounts in the last 200 years alone. Most occurred in Cadboro Bay in Victoria, British Columbia, the bay where it takes its name from. But sightings occurred even long before that. The Inuit, an indigenous people who inhabited the northern Pacific coast, once painted the Cadborosaurus on their canoes in an effort to ward the creature off. And it's the indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest who first learned that the creature migrates to the Pacific coast when spring and summer arrive. Reports of the sea creature carried through the 1930s, when the Cadborosaurus received widespread attention after a clerk of the British Columbia legislature told the Victoria Daily Times that he and his wife saw something obscure in the water while out sailing. Major H.W. Langley described the creature they saw near the front of their boat as being a greenish-brown color. The published encounter did more than to inform the public of what might be lurking off their shores. It inspired another eyewitness to come forward about his own experience. Immediately following Langley's account, F.W. Kemp, an official at the British Columbia Archives, discussed his own sighting. According to Kemp, while he and his family were sitting on the shore of Chatham Island Beach in British Columbia, they saw an extravagantly long serpent glide across the water. Kemp estimated that it stretched more than 80 feet. The most significant account, and probably the most entertaining, occurred later that decade in October 1937. In 1937, one of the boats from a British Columbian whaling station harpooned a sperm whale several miles off the coast and brought it to shore. In the whale's stomach, workers found the carcass of a strange creature that was photographed. James Wakelin, then 24, saw the creature back in 1937. He had no idea what the creature was. The creature measured 12 feet long, with a horse or camel-like head and a snake-like body and a strange tail. The whalers sent it to a local museum, and the museum director claimed that it was a sperm whale fetus and then tossed it out. However, further examination between the picture and the picture of an actual fetus showed that they were not the same. Unfortunately, by then, it was too late as the carcass had already been disposed. Some believe that the photograph is a hoax, but that does not explain the hundreds of sightings of a caddy that have occurred in the 60 years since. Terry Osland is another eyewitness who was walking her dog down a path towards the beach when her dog became scared. Terry then saw a horse-like face looking at her, which then dropped below the water. Damian Grant and Ryan Green, two college friends, saw a strange head that came out of the water about 60 feet away that they believe was of a caddy. A pilot named James Wells claims that he saw a caddy while flying over the bay. He claims that it was an odd-looking hop-like creature and that it was moving about 40 miles per hour. Perhaps the most exciting pieces of evidence in recent times came in 2009 when an Alaskan fisherman caught what he claims to be actual footage of the Cadborosaurus. However, the stills from his shaky footage are blurry and grainy and therefore questionable. Although some scientists claim that the creature does not exist, the people who have seen the creature are certain that the creature exists. It's still unclear whether the Cadborosaurus exists or not, but from San Francisco, California to Port Townsend, Washington, to Yakutat, Alaska, Pacific Northwesterns, still continue to spot and search for the mythical sea serpent. Clara Crane was born in 1871 and grew up to marry an older man named Leonard Gilbert Crane. They lived on a farm in a rural part of Texas. The couple would have a daughter who they named Marcella. In 1893, Marcella was killed in a farming accident with Leonard, who had been drinking at the time. She was only 5 years old. Clara blamed her husband for her daughter's death. In 1895, in her grief over her daughter's death, she murdered Leonard using poisoned caramel candies. She pled insanity and was incarcerated in the North Texas Lunatic Asylum, now known as the Terrell State Hospital. While in the asylum, Clara made a doll out of torn bed sheets. She called her doll Marcy, the same name as her daughter. Clara could be seen talking and singing to the doll by the asylum staff. There was also a letter found that was sent out to her sister, telling her that her and Marcy were fine and they couldn't wait to get back home. In 1899, due to overcrowding, the hospital released many patients who were considered low risks. Even though she had allegedly killed her husband, she was a perfectly polite and well-behaved patient, so she was released. Her crime was one of passion, so there was very little concern that she would offend again. There is no record of her following this event. This is where the known facts end and the story of the Candy Lady begins. Around the turn of the century, farmer kids on the outskirts of a small town in Texas would wake in the morning to find candy left on their bedroom windowsills. The treats would be there some nights, but not others. After the sweets came many nights, or many months, they would eventually be accompanied by a note signed by the Candy Lady. In 1903, 2 siblings from a local farm went missing. This was unheard of in the safe enclave of their small community, so people assumed the children were abducted by a drifter while at play. However, over the years, approximately 8 children disappeared. Out of fear, children in town told their parents about the candy that had been left on their sills from someone called the Candy Lady. After several children started to go missing, the townspeople blamed Clara for the disappearance since she allegedly killed her husband with poisoned candy. A nearby farmer had found rotten teeth of a child in a candy wrapper, and the town sheriff who investigated the case went missing and was later found in a ditch. He had forks shoved into his eyes and was found with candy in his pockets. No one really knows whatever became of Clara Crane, but to this day, it is believed the Candy Lady still roams around luring little children with candy, then pulling out their teeth or stabbing them in the eyes with forks. No one ever solved the mystery, but if you ask those who remember the missing children, they'll say, the Candy Lady got them. The Candy Lady has become a pervasive urban legend throughout the state of Texas. Her name is invoked as a boogie man or woman who lures children to her home with candy, then they are never heard from again. While most ghost hunters are out looking for spirits, there are some ghosts you should never look at. Hawaii's Nightmarchers, the phantoms of ancient Hawaiian warriors, are said to roam the islands at night. In life, these warriors supposedly traveled at night to protect people so sacred that the common man was never allowed to look at them. Breaking that rule meant death. The Nightmarchers' job wasn't to terrorize people. It was simply to protect the most sacred, high-ranking chiefs. Depending on kapu's status, the chiefs marched in front or behind the procession. The Nightmarchers showed mercy by traveling at night to spare people from harm. Nightmarchers are ghostly apparitions of a band of beings who move with purpose to the beat of primitive pounding drums. Some say they are armed spirit warriors en route to or from battle, touting archaic weaponry and clothed in decorated helmets and cloaks. Other accounts tell of high-ranking Alii, ruler, spirits being guided to a place of high importance or to welcome new warriors to join in battle. Perhaps these restless souls are looking to reclaim rightful territory, replay a battle gone awry, or avenge their own deaths. Some say the Nightmarchers are searching methodically for an entrance into the next world. Nightmarchers are said to roam through very specific locations and are often recognized by their raised torches and repeated olis or chants. Although there have been a few scattered reports of daytime marches, these apparitions appear to be most active at night and are said to march on certain nights designated by the moon. And although the Nightmarchers allegedly float a few inches off the ground, some local accounts tell of seeing mysterious footprints in their path after they have passed. Whatever their mission, the Nightmarchers are said to march in a single line, often carrying torches and weapons while chanting and playing drums. To protect yourself, you must quickly run indoors or lie on the ground face down in respect if you come in contact with these restless spirits. You must also be perfectly silent and still, for any sudden sound or movement could invite the deadly glance of a Nightmarcher. If you make eye contact with the Nightmarchers, you will die and be forced to march with them for an eternity. Another version on how to protect yourself, legend dictates you must strip naked and lie face down. There's a rumor that peeing on yourself will keep you alive. Whatever you decide to do, don't look at them. The Nightmarchers are set diligently upon their destination, and unless you make eye contact, the spirits are not thought to deviate from their path in an attempt to haunt humans nearby. If one of your ancestors happens to be marching, no one in the procession can harm you. The Nightmarchers have been seen near the Nuuanu Pali State wayside, the Manoa Falls Banyan Tree, and Lai on Oahu, as well as various sites throughout the Hawaiian Islands, including the entire town of Konakakai on the tiny island of Molokai. Nighttime visitors to any of these locations are urged to be wary. The Nightmarchers are thought to come out during periods of heavy wind, rain, and high surf, and fog or mist often accompanies them on their journey. Legend has it that they are seen marching in alternating rows of males and females, carrying torches and chanting to the beat of a drum. In 2012, Kapa Nui met with attorneys on the 23rd floor who claimed that the building's security cameras captured the Nightmarchers on video. A native Hawaiian cleaning lady was reportedly doing her job at night when a column of mist appeared. The woman died the next day. The following month, someone claimed to have seen the ghost of the lady marching with the Nightmarchers and disappearing to the other side of the wall. The Nightmarchers are said to march on the last 4 Hawaiian moon phases before the moon goes completely dark. At the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, United States, lurks a creature thought to be a stick person, a sort of demon by the native people, known as Walking Sam or Tall Man. He appears to be a 7-foot tall man who has a lean figure, long arms. He has eyes but lacks a mouth and a nose. He is as thin as a skeleton and black as night, and upon its head rests a black top hat. When he lifts his arms, the souls of both Lakota men and women hang from them. Some say he is attempting to protect his home, the forest. Others say he is lonely and that to encourage a person to leave their own friends, he will tell people no one likes them and that they should leave. Many believe this is him attempting to send the people into the woods where he can befriend them. But often, this is where his victims end their lives. It is also said that he was sent to Earth as a punishment and wants company. With the help of the living conditions such as abuse, poverty, drug and alcohol abuse, racism, and murder, Walking Sam tells those who are affected the most by these things, such as people between 12 and 34, to kill themselves, whispering to them that they are worthless, not deserving affection or life. You may know if one is nearby because you will hear it whistling to you. If you follow the whistling, this being may have the ability to paralyze you, hypnotize you, or simply drive you insane. If you were to disrespect them somehow, they would hold the grudge and seek out vengeance upon you, no matter the cost. Cases of mass attempted suicide have been reported within this reservation. Most often, the victims are young adults and teenagers, people who are often impressionable. One reported case claims that within a matter of months, 200 teens attempted suicide. 9 were successful. The community attributed this incident to the being called Walking Sam, particularly the elders, who at times even warned the youth of the being. One dreary day, a girl had locked herself away in her room. She had recently been experiencing a deep depression, even claiming to hear voices in her head. While she sat on her bed looking out her window, the heavy rainfall nearly blotted out the forest about 30 feet. The voices came in whispers that day, as if telling her she wasn't even worth the voice's time. The girl began contemplating her suicide when it was suggested by the voice. The rain lightened and she listened to how her parents never wanted her from the voice. Before it could finish the thought, it was cut off as the girl gazed into the woods. Just past a few of the nearest trees, she spotted something strange. A dark face quickly darted behind a tree. She said it had no features but for a pair of burning white spots where its eyes should have been. She continued watching and never saw the entity again. She later told her grandmother what was happening to her, what she had seen. The old woman asked if the shadow was tall. The girl said it was probably 7 feet up the tree. She began to shake of fear as her grandmother described the creature. Thin, black, skeleton-like, a tall hat. The grandmother told the girl the truth, that it was Walking Sam. The two went to a friend of the grandmother seeking help. She supposedly placed some sort of protection blessing on the girl. In the coming days, she no longer had the dark thoughts causing her depression. But when she would go near the woods by her house, she could hear whistling. Whistling coming from Walking Sam. There have been 103 suicide attempts since December 2014 on the reservation where the Oglala Lakota tribe lives. Luckily, only 9 of the attempts had proved successful. But all of those victims had been young. One of them was merely 12 years old, and none of those who died were over 24. These were not individual acts either. Most of the suicide attempts began with disturbing posts online. Elders and parents began to find Facebook groups of youths on the reservation where they would share suicide techniques and talk about killing themselves together, almost as if it was some after-school activity. There were videos talking about tying nooses, videos encouraging self-harming behavior, and even simple messages posted like, "Go do it." This sort of sharing indicated that not only were the kids making these attempts encouraging each other to do it, but it also meant that even if a youth in the community didn't actually attempt suicide, they still might be having suicidal thoughts. On top of that, there were also a creepy incident involving a different Facebook post. An image was shared of nooses hanging from trees near a small community of only about 1,000 people. The tribe police later said they believed the nooses were left as an invitation, as if encouraging individuals from the community to hang themselves. Walking Sam goes to any place that has pain and suffering and feeds off of it. And since Pine Ridge is basically the Detroit of South Dakota, he will continue to entice those who have been affected by the terrible conditions to commit suicide. According to Algonquin legends, the Wendigo haunts the northern forests of the United States and Canada, always looking for people to eat. As the tale goes, the Wendigo was once a lost hunter. During a brutally cold winter, this man's intense hunger drove him to cannibalism. After feasting on another human's flesh, he transformed into a crazed man-beast, roaming the forest in search of more people to eat. In another version of the story, the first Wendigo is said to have been a warrior who made a deal with the devil. In order to save his tribe, he gave up his soul and was transformed into a Wendigo. And when peace finally reigned, there was no need for such a fearsome creature, and the warrior was banished from his tribe and forced to live as an outcast. Roughly translated, the word Wendigo means the evil spirit that devours mankind. Another translation, said to be made by a German explorer around 1860, equates the word Wendigo with cannibal. Wendigo are said to have an insatiable hunger for human flesh. No matter how much flesh they eat, they remain hungry. This hunger is reflected in their appearance, which according to some is extremely thin. Some people who have claimed to encounter the beast say it's a relative of Bigfoot, but other reports compare the Wendigo to a werewolf instead. Since the Wendigo is said to be a cold weather creature, most sightings have been reported in Canada, as well as colder northern states in the US like Minnesota. At the turn of the 20th century, the Algonquin tribes blamed many unsolved disappearances of people on Wendigo attacks, thus calling him Spirit of Lonely Places. Another rough translation of Wendigo is the evil spirit that devours mankind. This translation is related to yet another version of the Wendigo that has the power to curse humans by possessing them. Despite their gaunt physiques, Wendigo are described by some as giants, measuring at about 14.8 to 15 feet in height. While there are slight variations as to the physical description of this creature, it is generally agreed that Wendigo have glowing eyes, long yellowed fangs, and long tongues. Most Wendigo are also said to have sallow and yellowish skin, though others say that they are matted with hair or have decaying skin. According to ethnohistorian Nathan Carlson, it's also been said that the Wendigo has large sharp claws and massive eyes like an owl. However, some other people simply describe the Wendigo as a skeleton-like figure with ash-toned skin. Different versions of the Wendigo legend say different things about his speed and agility. Some claim he is unusually fast and can endure walking for long periods of time, even in harsh winter conditions. Others say he walks in a more haggard manner, as if he is falling apart. But speed wouldn't be a necessary skill for a monster of this nature. Unlike other terrifying carnivores, the Wendigo doesn't rely on pursuing his prey in order to capture and eat it. Rather, one of his creepiest traits is his ability to mimic human voices. He uses this skill to lure people in and draw them away from civilization. Once they're isolated in the desolate depths of the wilderness, he attacks them and then feasts on them. Once it has infiltrated human minds, he can turn them into Wendigo as well, instilling upon them the same lust for human flesh that he himself has. A few legends state that the frozen person is successfully rescued from inside the creature. In most cases, however, death is the only way to free a person from the Wendigo. One of the most infamous cases is the story of Swift Runner, a trader with the Hudson's Bay Company who was married and the father of 6 children. In 1875, he served as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. During the winter of 1878 to 1879, Swift Runner and his family were starving, along with numerous other Cree families. His eldest son was the first to die of starvation, and at some point, Swift Runner succumbed to Wendigo psychosis. Though emergency food supplies were available at Hudson's Bay Company post some 25 miles away, he did not attempt to travel there. Rather, he killed the remaining members of his family and consumed them. He eventually confessed and was hanged by authorities at Fort Saskatchewan. A Wendigo allegedly made a number of appearances near a town called Roseso in northern Minnesota from the late 1800s through the 1920s. Each time that it was reported, an unexpected death followed, and finally, it was seen no more. Another well-known case involving Wendigo psychosis was that of Jack Fiddler, a member of the Cree tribe of northwestern Ontario. Fiddler claimed to have defeated 14 Wendigos during his lifetime. Some of these creatures were said to have been sent by enemy shamans and others were members of his own band who had been taken with the insatiable, incurable desire to eat human flesh. In the latter case, Fiddler was usually asked by family members to kill a very sick loved one before they turned into a Wendigo. Fiddler's own brother, Peter Flett, was killed after turning Wendigo when the food ran out on a trading expedition. Hudson's Bay Company traders, the Cree, and the missionaries were well aware of the Wendigo legend, though they often explained it as mental illness or superstition. Regardless, several incidents of people turning into Wendigo and eating human flesh are documented in the records of the company. In 1907, Fiddler and his brother Joseph were arrested by the Canadian authorities for murder. Jack committed suicide, but Joseph was tried and sentenced to life in prison. He ultimately was granted a pardon but died 3 days later in jail before receiving the news of this pardon. The Fiddler killings lent credibility to the notion that Wendigos were real, but they also point to a myth evolving from the eradication of physical or mental illness. The murder and quarantine disposal of Wendigo bodies may have stopped the spread of disease or silenced the mentally ill. Among the Assiniboine, the Cree, and the Ojibwe, a satirical ceremonial dance is sometimes performed during times of famine to reinforce the seriousness of the Wendigo taboo. The frequency of Wendigo psychosis cases decreased sharply in the 20th century as the Native Americans came into greater and greater contact with Western ideologies. However, Wendigo creature sightings are still reported, especially in northern Ontario, near the Cave of the Wendigo and around the town of Kenora, where it has allegedly been spotted by traders, trackers, and trappers for decades. There are many who still believe that the Wendigo roams the wood and the prairies of northern Minnesota and Canada. Kenora, Ontario, Canada, has been given the title of Wendigo Capital of the World by many. Sightings of the creature in this area have continued well into the new millennium. Some believe that the human personality continues to reside within the Wendigo, specifically where its heart should be. This person is frozen, and the only way to kill a Wendigo is to kill the human within it as well. According to legend, it is nearly impossible to escape a Wendigo. Hunters by nature, Wendigos are extremely fast and allow nothing to get in the way of their never-ending hunger. Even if you could escape physical damage, which is unlikely, the very fact that you'd encountered an otherworldly Wendigo would leave you mentally vacant. Wendigos hibernate for months or years, but woe betide when they awaken. Wendigos can stealthily stalk victims for extended periods, thanks to supernatural speed, endurance, and heightened senses, such as hearing so profound they can pick up on panicked heartbeats from miles away. Once the chase begins, Wendigos engage in a torturous game. They bait their prey, release shrieks or growls, and sometimes mimic human voices calling for help. When the hunt begins in earnest, a Wendigo becomes all business. It will race after its prey, upending trees, creating animal stampedes, and stirring up ice storms and tornadoes. Don't be fooled into believing you're safe indoors. The Wendigo can unlock door and enter homes where it will kill and eat the inhabitants before converting the cabins into Wendigo domiciles for hibernation. Can you shoot a Wendigo? Not easily. A wounded Wendigo simply regenerates. The trick is to employ silver bullets or a pure silver blade or stake and strike right through the Wendigo's ice-cold heart. Upon wounding the Wendigo's heart, you must take care to shatter it into pieces, then lock the shattered heart in a silver box and bury it in a church cemetery. Not want to seek a simple end, the rest of the Wendigo must be dismembered with a silver-plated axe so you can salt and burn the body, and then scatter its ashes to the winds. Or as a second option, bury the pieces in a remote location. Skip a step, and the Wendigo may be able to resurrect itself, hunt you down, and inflict a slow and agonizing death. Legend has it that in 1735, a Pines resident known as Mother Leeds found herself pregnant for the 13th time. Mother Leeds was not living a wealthy lifestyle by any means. Her husband was a drunkard who made a few efforts to provide for his wife and 12 children. Reaching the point of absolute exasperation upon learning of her 13th child, she raised her hands to the heavens and proclaimed, "Let this one be a devil!" Mother Leeds went into labor a few months later on a tumultuously stormy night, no longer mindful of the curse she had uttered previously regarding her unborn child. Her children and husband huddled together in one room of their Leeds Point home, while local midwives gathered to deliver the baby in another. By all accounts, the birth went routinely, and the 13th Leeds child was a seemingly normal baby boy. Within minutes, however, Mother Leeds' unholy wish of months before began to come to fruition. The baby started to change and metamorphosed right before her very eyes. Within moments, it transformed from a beautiful newborn baby into a hideous creature unlike anything the world had ever seen. The wailing infant began growing at an incredible rate. It sprouted horns from the top of its head and talon-like claws tore through the tips of its fingers. Leathery bat-like wings unfurled from its back, and hair and feathers sprouted all over the child's body. Its eyes began glowing bright red as they grew larger in the monster's gnarled and snarling face. The creature savagely attacked its own mother, killing her, then turned its attention to the rest of the horrified onlookers who witnessed its tempestuous transformation. It flew at them, clawing and biting, voicing unearthly shrieks the entire time. It tore the midwives limb from limb, maiming some and killing others. The monster then knocked down the door to the next room, where its own father and siblings cowered in fear and attacked them all, killing as many as it could. Those who survived to tell the tale then watched in horror as the rotten beast sprinted to the chimney and flew up it, destroying it on the way and leaving a pile of rubble in its wake. The creature then made good its escape into the darkness and desolation of the Pine Barrens, where it has lived ever since. To this day, the creature known varyingly as the Leeds Devil and the Jersey Devil claims the pines as its own and terrorizes any who are unfortunate enough to encounter it. In 18th and 19th centuries, the Jersey Devil was spotted sporadically throughout the Pine Barrens region, frightening local residents and any of those brave enough to traverse the vast and developed expanses of New Jersey's southern reaches. Unearthly wails were often reported emanating from the dark forests and swampy bogs, and the slaughter of domesticated animals would invariably be attributed to the Phantom of the Pines. Over the years, the legend of the Leeds Devil grew, occasionally even overstepping the boundaries of its rural Pine Barrens haunt to terrorize local towns and cities. The most infamous of these incidents occurred during the week of January 16 through 23, 1909. Early in the week, reports started emerging from all across the Delaware Valley that strange tracks were being found in the snow. The mysterious footprints went over and under fences, through fields and backyards, and across the rooftops of houses. They were even reported in the large cities of Camden and Philadelphia. Panic immediately began to spread, and possess formed in more than one town. Fear and intrigue grew even greater when it was reported that the Black Hounds refused to follow the unidentified creature's tail in Hamilton. School closed or suffered low attendance throughout the lower New Jersey and in Philadelphia. Mills in the Pine Barrens were forced to close when workers refused to leave their homes and travel through the woods to get to their jobs. Eyewitnesses spotted the beast in Camden and in Bristol, Pennsylvania, and in both cities, police fired on it but did not manage to bring it down. A few days later, it reappeared in Camden, attacking a late-night meeting of a social club and then flying away. Earlier that day, it had appeared in Haddon Heights, terrorizing a trolley car full of passengers before flying away. Witnesses claimed that it looked like a large flying kangaroo. Another trolley car full of people saw it in Burlington when it scurried across the tracks in front of their car. In West Collingswood, it appeared on the roof of a house and was described as an ostrich-like creature. Firemen turned their hose upon it, but it attacked them and then flew away. The entire week, people reported that their livestock, particularly their chickens, were being slaughtered. This was most widespread in the towns of Bridgeton and Millville. The marauding misanthrope reappeared later in the week in Camden, where a local woman found the beast attempting to eat her dog. She hit it with a broomstick and it flew away. While there has not since been another week to match the frequency, fervor, and intensity of the January 1909 rampage, numerous sightings of the Jersey Devil have continued to be reported to this day. On November 12, 1966, 5 men who were digging a grave at a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia, claimed to have seen a man-like figure fly low from the trees over their heads. This was the first reported sighting of what would come to be known as the Mothman, an elusive creature that, although now widely celebrated by the town it once terrorized, remains as mysterious as it was on the night that a few frightened witnesses first laid eyes on it. Shortly thereafter, on November 15, 1966, 2 young couples from Point Pleasant, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallette, told police they saw a large gray creature whose eyes glowed red when the car's headlights picked it up. They described it as a large flying man with 10-foot wings. Eyewitnesses told the local paper, the Point Pleasant Register, that the beast had bright red eyes about 6 inches apart and a wingspan of 10 feet, and that it seemed to want to avoid the bright headlights of the car. According to the witnesses, the creature was able to fly at incredible speeds, perhaps as much as 100 miles per hour, one of the men told reporters, although all agreed it did make for a clumsy runner on the ground. They knew because the creature allegedly chased their moving vehicle to the outskirts of town in the air, then scuttled into a nearby field and disappeared. It was following their car while they were driving in an area outside of town known as the TNT area, the site of a former World War II munitions plant. The papers at this point were skeptically calling it a bird and a mysterious creature, though they did print Mallette's description that said it was like a man with wings. But more and more sightings were reported in the Point Pleasant area over the next year as the legend of the Mothman took shape. The Gettysburg Times reported 8 additional sightings in the short span of 3 days following the first claims, including 2 volunteer firefighters who supposedly saw what they described as a very large bird with large red eyes. One sighting, reported by Salem, West Virginia resident Newell Partridge, told of strange patterns that appeared on his television screen one evening, followed by a mysterious sound just outside of his home. Shining a flashlight toward the direction of the noise, Partridge supposedly witnessed 2 red eyes resembling bicycle reflectors looking back at him. This anecdote remains a popular one in the Mothman mythos, especially because it resulted in the disappearance of Partridge's dog, supposedly to the clutches of the fearsome beast. On December 15, 1967, just over a year after the first Mothman sighting, traffic was especially bad. The Silver Bridge, built in 1928 to connect Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Gallipolis, Ohio, was packed with cars from end to end. It had been built in a time when cars were lighter. The Model T weighed just about 1,500 pounds, a modest sum when compared to the 1967 average for a car which is 4,000 pounds. Its engineers hadn't been particularly imaginative when it comes to the future, and nor had they been specially cautious. The bridge's design featured very little redundancy, meaning that if one part failed, there was almost nothing in place to prevent other parts from failing as well. And on that cold December day, that was exactly what happened. Without warning, a single eye-bar near the top of the bridge on the Ohio side cracked. The chain snapped, and the bridge, its careful equilibrium disturbed, fell to pieces, plunging cars and pedestrians into the icy water of the Ohio River below. 46 died, drowned, or crushed in the wreckage. It is said that the Mothman was seen on the bridge near the time of the accident, though whether as a warning or the cause is uncertain. It was the second terrible and bizarre thing to put the small community of Point Pleasant on the map in a year, and some connected the two. The idea that visitations from the Mothman predicted disasters led some believers to make ties to the Chernobyl disaster of 1986, the Mexican swine flu outbreak of 2009, and the 2011 nuclear disaster in the Fukushima, Japan, among others. The Mothman can still be seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia today in the form of a historical museum, open 7 days a week, and also as a 12-foot tall chrome polished statue, complete with massive steel wings and ruby red eyes. A festival, commemorating the Mothman's visit has taken place annually for years, a fun celebration that attracts locals and tourists alike. If you're passing through West Virginia this September, consider swinging by the festivities to remember one of America's strangest and most intriguing local legends. In the 1970s, something strange haunted the people in the small town of Enfield, Illinois. On April 25, 1973, Henry McDaniel was among the first to encounter this terrible creature, the Enfield Monster. The reports were covered by the news media at the time, with some suggesting they may have been caused by a wild ape or an escaped kangaroo. On the night of April 25, 1973 at about 9:30 p.m., Henry McDaniel and his wife had returned home and were greeted by their two children, Lil and Henry. The kids proceeded to tell him a tale about how something had tried to get into the house by scratching on the door. Shortly thereafter, Henry was alerted to a peculiar scratching sound at his front door. He expected to see a dog or a cat, but what he met instead was far stranger. What Henry found to his terror was a creature that had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood 4.5 feet tall and was grayish colored. He added later that it was almost like a human body, and it was trying to get into the house. Henry was completely mortified by the sight of this horrible apparition, slammed the door, and rushed to grab his .22 pistol and a flashlight. Henry proceeded to fire on the creature 4 times, and according to him, "When I fired that first shot, I know I hit it." The beast hissed at him. Most sources say that it sounded rather like a wildcat, and proceeded to bound away in long leaps across the yard, eventually becoming lost to McDaniel's sight as it made its way towards the railroad and the cover of the trees. He insisted that he had seen the thing cover 50 feet in 3 leaps. Stunned by the encounter, Henry proceeded to call the police. Upon investigation, the state troopers discovered a series of scratches in the siding of the house and footprints that were very similar to a dog's, but having 6 toes instead of 4. 2 of the tracks were 4 inches wide, while the print left by the 3rd foot was smaller. Many on the police force were skeptical about what McDaniel had seen, despite having just received news of an attack on a small boy just 30 minutes earlier. The creature had ripped at the child's clothes with the claws on its arms, while the talons on the toes had shredded the kid's shoes. However, the police couldn't find any trace of the entity, so things cooled down for a moment. The boy, Greg Garrett, a 10-year-old neighbor of McDaniel, later told Western Illinois University researchers that his report was a hoax to tease Mr. M and have fun with an out-of-town newsman. However, on May 6th at 3 a.m., Henry encountered the creature again after having been roused from his sleep by the commotion from his neighbor's dogs. Once again, he saw the creature loitering about near the train tracks. This went on for several minutes until the entity casually bounced away into the night. Then, after word of the Enfield monster had gotten around, people began to flock to the small town in hopes of seeing the thing. 2 days later, a day after McDaniel was interviewed on local radio, the local press reported that police were called to investigate reports of gunfire and arrested 5 young men from out of town who had come to Enfield in order to photograph the creature, carrying shotguns and rifles for protection. The White County Sheriff dismissed reports of this as a monster hunting expedition, as an exaggeration, saying that the men were just out drinking and raising hell, mentioning the monster only briefly during questioning. The men were charged with hunting violations. They were very enthusiastic, but they were also intrusive. This prompted the local sheriff, Roy Pochard Jr., to warn McDaniel about keeping his mouth closed, or he would be forced to incarcerate him. Over the next few months, the crowds began to grow larger. With the larger crowds came increased alarm among the citizens of Enfield. Some among them were genuine monster hunters, while others were just hunters or thrill seekers with guns. This forced the sheriff's hand, particularly when he had to arrest 5 gun-toting hunters for shooting at a gray thing that ran through the woods. 2 of those hunters, Mike Mogul and Roger Tappy, both from Elwood, Indiana, both swore that they had witnessed a gray monkey quickly move through the underbush. Sheriff Pochard made numerous threats against Henry McDaniel, which it should be noted had no effect whatsoever. He was convinced that there was something very strange going on. Shortly thereafter, once the frenzy of hunters and tourists had died down, 4 more people saw the Enfield monster. Between 1941 and 1942, there was a string of similar sightings in the small village of Mount Vernon, which is ironically less than 40 miles away from Enfield. These encounters involve a mysterious leaping beast that terrorized the local people and is supposedly responsible for numerous animal deaths and mutilations in the region. The locals called the creature the Mount Vernon Monster and described it as being vaguely baboon-like in appearance and able to leap anywhere from 20 to 40 feet in a single bound. However, this creature is likened more to the devil monkey than the Enfield monster. But it is a possibility that this was in fact the same creature. Used as a case study for a paper on social contagion in 1978, sociologists cite the episode as an example of collective behavior, where a group or crowd can be affected by the spread of group emotions, such as panics, hysterias, collective visions, and extreme instances of suggestibility. The researchers found there were no more than 3 first-hand reports that have subsequently been exaggerated by news stories and local gossip into an epidemic. Akamanto, described as a male spirit or ghost, is also known as red cape, red vest, akai kami ayo kami, or occasionally ayo manto, is a Japanese urban legend about a masked spirit who wears a red cloak and who appears to people using toilets in public or school bathrooms, usually the last stall of all the stalls. Often described as a beautiful man in life and hounded constantly by admirers, he supposedly wears a mask to hide his face. Japanese children scare each other by repeating the tale of what happened to 2 schoolboys many years ago. One day, one of the boys went to the bathroom only to find that there was no toilet paper in the stall. As he cursed to himself, he heard a voice asking him whether he wanted red or blue paper. He answered red, and all the blood seeped out of his body, so that he died in minutes. The story spread around the school. Some months later, the boy's friend found himself in the same toilet stall, and again, there was no paper. He heard the same voice ask him what paper he would like. Knowing the story and remembering what had happened to his friend, he chose blue. Gradually, his throat began to tighten and soon he was struggling to breathe. Classmates found him dead, blue in the face from suffocation. If an individual attempts to outsmart a kamanto by asking for a different color of paper, cloak, or cape, it is often said that they will be dragged to an underworld or hell as a result. In some versions, choosing a yellow paper, cloak, or cape will result in the occupant's head being forced into the toilet. Ignoring the spirit or replying that one does not want or prefer either kind of paper is said to make the spirit go away. In some accounts, rejecting both options and running away from the akamanto will also result in the individual's survival, although sometimes akamanto will simply block the exit. La Mala Hora is a scary story and urban legend from the folklore of New Mexico. The name means the evil hour or the evil one. It is also known as La Malora, La Malorga, or the evildoer. In Chiapas, the southernmost state of Mexico, they tell of La Mala Hora. She usually appears as a beautiful long-haired woman dressed in white, walking along the side of the road at night. Men who encounter her are so taken by her beauty and seductive ways that they follow her mindlessly with no heed to where she's leading them. The lucky few who have met La Mala Hora and lived to tell the tale say that while following her, they lost their sense of direction. If they carried a lamp, it would suddenly stop working. Luckily, these fellows noticed that the lovely lady they were following floated rather than walked, or they noticed that her toes were backwards. Those poor victims who don't look down at La Mala Hora's feet will follow her to their doom as she leads them over the edge of a ravine. And if you see La Mala Hora on the road dressed in black, then look out. She is far fiercer and more aggressive in her black-clad form. Anyone who is unfortunate enough to set eyes on this demon runs the risk of becoming insane. It tries to hypnotize and paralyze anyone who happens to encounter it at night. When it attacks, it suddenly rushes towards the unsuspecting victim and envelopes him in a hug that suffocates him. The victim will be found dead the following day by the side of the road. One of the tales told is that there was a woman who received a call from her friend who was having relationship problems and asked her to come spend the night since she was scared that her ex-boyfriend would come back. She asked her if she could come spend the night since her husband was away on a business trip. Since she had been home by herself for several days now, she was feeling lonely, so she decided to accept. It was late, just after midnight, when she left her house in her car and the dark roads were deserted. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching or following her, but she told herself that it was just her mind playing tricks. Halfway to her destination, she stopped at a crossroads and suddenly, a dark shape like a cloud of smoke rolled towards her car. Then it disappeared. The lights turned green and she accelerated, but immediately slammed on the brakes when she saw a figure in the road right in front of her. She was small like a girl, but with the face of an old lady twisted into a hateful grin. Her eyes glowed red and she bared black and sharpened teeth. She crawled on top of the car and started to scrape and hit the window on the driver's side with clawed hands. She put her foot to the floor in sheer terror and the car lurched away from the crossroads, leaving her attacker on the tarmac. As she sped away from the lights, she realized with horror that the demon woman was still chasing her car and somehow keeping pace, her talons scraping at the metal with a terrible noise. She accelerated to well over the speed limit, her heart pounding, and then the noise stopped. Her heart was hammering in her chest as she watched in her rearview mirror the figure in the middle of the road. She was standing still, but seemed to be as close as before. She was growing towards the sky and her great claws were so large that they touched the ground. Then the car turned a corner and she was gone. When she reached her friend's house, she ran to her door and was yelling for her friend to open the door. As soon as she was inside, she locked it, closed all the curtains, and told her friend not to look out the window. She told her friend what happened on her way there. Her friend listened quietly, but kept looking at her watch and seemed to know what she was talking about. Her friend said she must be La Mala Hora, the evil one. They say she appears at a crossroads when someone is about to die. If you manage to escape her grasp, someone you love will die in your place. It took her hours to get to sleep, but when she awoke the following morning, she wondered if it had all been a dream. Later that day, as she was driving home, her phone kept ringing, but she didn't stop to answer it. She had to pass over the same crossroads on her journey back, but was relieved to find that in the daylight she wasn't frightened. When she reached home, she saw a police car waiting in her driveway and wondered whether she had been burgled. Or maybe her husband had been caught speeding again? The officers got out of the car but wouldn't tell her anything until she went inside. They asked if she was alone in the house and said that her husband had been found dead in his hotel. They thought that he had been followed back to his room by a thief who had forced his way in and stabbed him to death for his wallet. She didn't want to believe them, as she had spoken to him late the night before, so she asked what time it had happened. "Not long after midnight," came the reply. The Bunny Man is an urban legend that originated from two incidents in Fairfax County, Virginia in 1970, but has been spread throughout the Washington, D.C. and Maryland areas. The legend has many variations. Most involve a man wearing a rabbit costume who attacks people with an axe or hatchet. Most of the stories occur around Colchester Overpass, a southern railway overpass spanning Colchester Road near Clifton, Virginia, sometimes referred to as Bunny Man Bridge. There is a tunnel under a road that runs through remote woods in Oregon. An insane asylum had been built in the vicinity not long after the Civil War. As the area became colonized and became more popular, houses were built around the asylum, and near the turn of the century, the residents started to question its existence. When an escaped patient attacked a child, the authorities finally decided to close the institution. As the patients were being moved to the newly built Lorton prison, one convict escaped, Douglas Griffin. Griffin had been committed after he brutally killed his parents with an axe on Easter morning when he was 12. The local police searched the woods for 2 months, but all they found were several half-eaten and mutilated rabbit corpses. On Halloween, 3 local teenagers disappeared. That night, bloodhounds looking for the kids led officers to a small bridge with a rail line at the top and a road running under the bridge. Hanging from the bridge were the missing teens, disemboweled like the rabbits in the woods. The teens had been walking to a friend's house and apparently found Griffin hiding under the bridge. Griffin himself stood at the top of the bridge waving an axe and wearing a makeshift bunny mask out of rabbit fur. As he manically laughed, he was struck by an oncoming train. In writing about the tragedy, the papers all wrote about the Bunny Man of Clifton. On another Halloween, a couple of teens were driving with their girlfriends looking to scare them. They decided to go out to the old railroad bridge where the Bunny Man was killed. It was almost midnight. The boys stopped under the bridge and dragged the scared girls out of the car, teasing them that the ghost of the Bunny Man would get them. The teasing became too much for one of the girls, who pushed the boys away and ran out from under the bridge into the road. At that moment, at the exact stroke of midnight, she saw a bright flash of light under the bridge. When the light faded, she saw her friends' bodies mutilated and hanging from the bridge, and their car had a bloody axe struck into the windshield. Ever since that night, local kids gather every Halloween at Bunny Man Bridge, but they all scatter before midnight as none want to be caught under the bridge when the Bunny Man comes. On the evening of October 19, 1970, U.S. Air Force Academy cadet Robert Benet and his fiancée, who were visiting relatives on Guinea Road in Burke. Around midnight, while returning from a football game, they reportedly parked their car in a field on Guinea Road to visit an uncle who lived across the street from where the car was parked. As they sat in the front seat with the motor running, they noticed something moving outside the rear window. Moments later, the front passenger window was smashed and there was a white-clad figure standing near the broken window. Bennett turned the car around while the man screamed at them about trespassing, including, "You're on private property and I have your tag number." As they drove down the road, the couple discovered a hatchet on the car floor. When the police requested a description of the man, Bennett insisted that he was wearing a white suit with long bunny ears. However, Bennett's fiancée contested that their assailant did not have bunny ears on his head but was wearing a white capirote of some sort. They both remembered seeing his face clearly, but in the darkness, they could not determine his race. The police returned the hatchet to Bennett after examination. The second reported sighting occurred on the evening of October 29, 1970, when construction security guard Paul Phillips approached a man standing on the porch of an unfinished home in Kings Park West on Guinea Road. Phillips said the man was wearing a gray, black, and white bunny costume and was about 20 years old, 5 feet 8 inches, and weighed about 175 pounds. The man began chopping at a porch post with a long-handled axe, saying, "You're trespassing. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." The Fairfax County Police opened investigations into both incidents, but both were eventually closed for lack of evidence. In the weeks following the incidents, more than 50 people contacted the police claiming to have seen the bunny man. Nowadays, people say they see a ghost of a man wearing a bunny suit. The scariest thing is, if you walk near the Bunnyman Bridge, his ghost chases you with a hatchet. A vacationeer was walking along the beach on a picturesque island in British Columbia, Canada, when she caught sight of a sports shoe on the sand. There was nobody else around, so she assumed that it must have been washed up by the waves. Upon closer inspection, to her horror, she realized that the shoe contained a human foot in an advanced state of decomposition. Since August 2007, several detached human feet have been discovered on the coasts of the Salish Sea in British Columbia, Canada, and Washington, USA. As of December 19, 2017, 13 feet have been found in the Canadian province of British Columbia and 4 in the U.S. state of Washington. These foot discoveries are not the first. One was found in Vancouver in 1887, leading to the place of discovery being called Leg and Boot Square. On July 30, 1914, the Vancouver Sun reported that recent arrivals from Kimsquit reported a human leg encased in a high boot was found on a beach near the mouth of the Salmon River. It was thought that the remains were from a man who had drowned on the river the previous summer. The series of discoveries has been called astounding and almost beyond explanation, as no other body parts have turned up. The sudden and regular appearance of the disembodied feet led to speculation that perhaps a serial killer was on the loose, leaving the body parts behind as grisly trophies. They have also caused speculation that the feet may be those of people who died in a boating accident or a plane crash in the ocean. One explanation is that some of the feet were those of 4 men who died in a plane crash near Quadra Island in 2005 and whose bodies have not been recovered, though one of the feet has been determined to be from a female. Foul play has also been suggested, although none of the first 4 feet showed tool marks. This does not rule out foul play, however. It is possible that the bodies could have been weighed down and disposed of, and the feet were separated due to natural decay. Determining the origin of the feet is complicated because ocean currents may carry floating items long distances, and because currents in the Strait of Georgia are unpredictable. A foot may float as far as 1,000 miles. Also, human feet tend to produce adipocere, a soap-like substance formed from body fat, which makes it hard for forensic scientists to find clues. Under optimal conditions, a human body may remain intact in water for as long as 3 decades, meaning that the feet may have been floating around for years. Another theory is that the feet belong to people who died in the Asian tsunami on December 26, 2004. Richmond-based writer Shane Lambert has advocated this position, pointing to the fact that many of the shoes found were manufactured and sold in 2004 or earlier. Lambert acknowledges that there could be other sources for the shoes or multiple sources. However, besides the dates when the shoes were manufactured, Lambert cites ocean currents and their ultimate northward tendencies up to the Pacific Ocean from part of the region that was hit by the 2004 tsunami. But why did people keep finding only their shoes? And why did this happen only in that particular part of the world? The authorities concluded that most of the feet were not deliberately severed, but disarticulated. after decomposing in the water, and that the kind of shoes people were finding, like trainers and hiking boots, are the sort of items that will eventually float ashore. Mount Mihara is an active volcano on the Japanese isle of Izu Oshima. Although the volcano is predominantly basaltic, major eruptions have occurred at intervals of 100 to 150 years. In the realm of fiction, Mount Mihara was the place where the Japanese government imprisoned Godzilla in the movie The Return of Godzilla. 5 years later, in the sequel Godzilla vs. Biollante, bombs placed on Mount Mihara go off and release Godzilla from his fiery tomb. In 1933, a 21-year-old Kyoko Matsumoto fell in love with fellow Gisen Women's University student Masako Tomita. Same-sex relationships were a taboo in Japanese culture at the time. Matsumoto decided to end her life by jumping into the crater of Mount Mihara on the Japanese fishing island of Izu Oshima. Mount Mihara was already a well-known suicide site since an observation post near the top of the volcanic cone allowed visitors to look straight down into the crater. Even as early as the 1920s, people could commit suicide by jumping into the volcano. Incidents such as this were relatively rare though, since there were more practical alternatives including jumping off one of Tokyo's skyscrapers. Unfortunately for Matsumoto, business owners had recently put a stop to high-rise suicides by placing security barriers at the top of those buildings where suicides had taken place. Though determined jumpers could still find accessible buildings, Masako Tomito telling all her friends at school about Matsumoto's death would establish Mount Mihara as a new suicide venue. Along with a poignant goodbye note she left behind, the story of a young woman ending her life by jumping into a volcano would eventually inspire a series of copycat suicides. Kyoko Matsumoto's suicide became a media sensation across Japan as new agencies picked up the story and made her a celebrity. Her goodbye note was reprinted in the newspapers, and Mount Mihara suddenly attracted a new wave of tourists and curiosity seekers. Tokyo-based steamship company launched a daily steamship connection to the island, becoming a morbid tourism destination. Local community of poor fishermen switched their focus to tourism and offered donkey rides for tourists to an observation point overlooking the crater. The media craze had another disturbing effect: copycat suicides. People started to travel to Mount Mihara to end their lives by jumping off steep crater cliffs. In the year 1933 alone, more than 900 people reportedly killed themselves there. Tourists traveled to the infamous volcano just to sit and wait for another inevitable suicide jumper. Media reports claim that over 2,000 people committed suicide in Mount Mihara in 1930s. Eventually, authorities fenced off the volcano's crater and guard patrols stopped potential jumpers. The volcano jumper trend stopped, but suicide in Japan is an ongoing serious social issue. This alleged mummy made her first appearance on the 25th of March 1930, reportedly wearing a gown from the spring-summer collection. Locals were struck by how real La Pascualita looked and by her resemblance to the owner, Pascuala Esparza, and given the recent passing of her daughter, rumor had it that the mannequin was actually the well-preserved mummy of her daughter, who died from a black widow spider bite just before her own wedding. Esparza denied the rumors. The mannequin was strikingly lifelike, with rosy cheeks, natural flowing hair, clear eyes, and extremely realistic hands. She made passers-by feel uneasy. In 1930, the owner of a shop selling bridal dresses in Chihuahua, Mexico, suffered a terrible tragedy. Her daughter was at the wedding shop on the day she was due to get married, preparing to don the intricate and beautiful dress that her mother had made for her. It was brought out of the back room and laid out carefully for the bride. She put it on, but as it was being fastened, she let out a cry of pain, holding her neck, and slumped to the floor. She never regained consciousness. An employee claimed to have seen a black widow jump from the dress after the incident, and the doctor said that the girl had indeed suffered a fatal spider bite that poisoned her blood. This is only the beginning of her story, however. Her mother was distraught and could not bear to part with her daughter, so, in secret, she hatched a plan to keep her close forever. According to legend, she enlisted a local funeral parlor to deploy all their skills in embalming the girl so that she looked almost alive, and then, instead of taking the body to the church, she installed it in the wedding shop storeroom where she could look at her all day. Exactly 1 year after her death, which would have been the girl's first wedding anniversary, locals were greeted by a new mannequin in the dress shop. It was wearing the very same dress that the owner's daughter had been wearing when she was killed. When people who had known the girl commented on how the doll looked just like her, the owner claimed that any resemblance to her daughter was just a sad coincidence, but that she couldn't bear to get rid of that dress. The mannequin started to attract visitors who were drawn by her beautifully lifelike features, and soon, people began to go to the store just to gaze in wonder at La Pascualita as she became known. Rumors began circulating that the dummy did not just look like the dead girl, it was the dead girl. It was said that her eyes followed visitors around the shop as they browsed, and that she would change her poses when no one was looking, and that she appeared in different places each morning as if she had been moving around when the shop was closed. One story described how a magician had fallen in love with La Pascualita and would take her out dancing at night. The owner continued to deny it. Who would do such a thing? But people who worked in the store were in no doubt that La Pascualita was more than a lifeless mannequin. When they got up close to change her dress, they would break out in a cold sweat, disturbed by her long delicate eyelashes, slightly wrinkled hands, green eyes that appeared to be wet with tears, and even varicose veins on her legs. Even skeptical observers, determined to prove to others that the figure was only a mannequin, were said to be so captivated by her beauty that they left the shop convinced that she was real. Experts agree that La Pascualita is not a corpse. For a corpse to stay in such a pristine condition, the environment must be perfect. The embalming must be flawless, and constant work would need to be done. Something that is not possible in a small town bridal shop window. After the owner died, the legend of La Pascualita continued to live on, and today, people still travel from miles around to marvel at her beauty and the green eyes that follow you around the room. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 in the nuclear power plant triggered a catastrophic meltdown in the city of Chernobyl, causing the worst disaster in the history of nuclear power generation. In the weeks leading up to the disaster, everything was, for the most part, normal for the citizens of Chernobyl. But for the workers in the power plant, a strange rumor had started to go around. Some claimed to have seen a giant black bird-like creature flying around above the power plant, and in particular, reactor number 4. The description several employees gave of this creature was it looked like a man-bird, but one that lacked a head and was only a neck. Its wingspan was believed to be around 20 feet, and those who were close enough also reported seeing red eyes. According to accounts, some of these employees even mentioned their bizarre experiences to their superiors at the facility, but without evidence or any clear-cut indication of what the problem may be, there was very little these officials could do, even had they been willing to take action. Shortly after the sightings, those who had witnessed the strange creature reported headaches, bad dreams, and even strange, seemingly threatening phone calls where no one appeared to be on the other side of the phone. After the meltdown, all the nightmares and phone calls ceased, and the black bird was never sighted again. While the mysterious bird did disappear completely after April 26th, it was reported by a number of survivors of the fallout, as well as workers who tried to rescue those trapped in the reactor, that the same creature could be seen flying in and out of the smoke spiraling up from the damaged reactor. The connections to the Mothman story of 1968 were strikingly similar,
especially regarding the threatening phone calls that led up to a major disaster. The sightings of the Blackbird of Chernobyl seem to further support the theory that is often brought up in connection with Mothman, that these beings may not be inherently evil or bad, but rather an omen for coming disaster. A second, less accepted theory suggests that the Blackbird of Chernobyl was nothing more than the misidentification of the black stork, an endangered species endemic to southern Eurasia. The black stork stands nearly 3 feet tall and has a wingspan of nearly 6 feet. This theory, however, fails to consider the menacing phone calls and the disturbing nightmares. Also, the physical description given by the majority of eyewitnesses who actually saw the Blackbird of Chernobyl does not in any way match the physical appearance of the black stork. The Goatman is a humanoid cryptid most commonly associated with Louisiana, Maryland, and Texas. It is described as a 7-foot-tall hybrid creature, part man and part goat. The Goatman legend began way back in the 1940s and 50s. The Goatman goes by other names like Pope Lake Monster, Satyr, and Faun. He has the lower body of a goat and the upper body of a man with rams growing out of his head. It is said that he is between 6 and 8 feet tall and he makes a very high-pitched squealing sound. Most people that have come close to encountering the Goatman have said that there was a certain odor that you would smell that would be a dead giveaway that he was near. Some claim it is a relative of the New Orleans evil chupacabra-like cryptid, the Grunch. The Goatman is said to live in caves, under bridges, and outside of cities and towns. He has been seen holding an axe to kill its prey or victims. It is not a supernatural creature, so it is vulnerable. The first actual report of the Goatman was in 1957, where some people reported that they saw a hairy monster in the Forestville and Upper Marlboro area. The story of the Goatman began at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. It's said that the Goatman was created by a scientist, Dr. Scott Fletcher, who used to work at the research center. He was experimenting with goats with his assistant, William Lutsford, when something went wrong with the experiments, and that's how the Goatman was created. The urban legends often tells of it killing young couples in parked cars or scouring neighborhoods killing family pets. There are also tales of them breaking into people's houses and raping its victims. And many attest from the areas that he haunts, it does not matter if you're a man or a woman, he will overtake you and rape you nonetheless. This is not the only story that was created about how the Goatman came about, but it is the one most people have heard. Other stories are of a half-man, half-animal that walks on 2 legs, or of a hermit who just roams around in the woods, and when anyone approaches him, he runs away. The Goatman has been seen in Louisiana, Kentucky, Texas, Maryland, and many other states. The story in Texas is that the Goatman was a man named Jack who was very close to his goats. One day, some man came to bother Jack and his goats. The next night, deputies came to look for Jack and could not find him. A couple weeks later, people started hearing odd noises from under a bridge and smelling a very foul odor in the air. When some deputies went to go investigate this, they didn't expect to see what they saw that night. When they turned around, they saw a very tall creature with red eyes, holding the head of Jack's favorite goat and Jack's body. Also, it is said that if you park your car on Goatman's Bridge, which is located in Texas, turn off all the lights and honk your horn 3 times, the Goatman will appear. Goatman is believed to be responsible for the deaths of pets that are just roaming around the woods or area, and couples that are parked in cars in the woods or secluded places. It can jump very high and to great distances. In 1957, some people said that they had seen the Goatman themselves. In 1962, it reportedly killed 14 hikers. So far, the Goatman is believed to be responsible for the death of 15 people. Survivors of the Goatman said that it hacks its victims to pieces while making weird sounds. When authorities come to the scenes, all they find are lifeless bodies that have been decapitated. The Goatman is known particularly to hang around Governor's Bridge in Davidson, Maryland. Governor's Bridge is also known as Crybaby Bridge because of another tale about a mother who threw her baby over the bridge, and people who crossed that bridge would hear a ghostly sound of a baby crying. Some have also said to have seen a creature wielding an axe called the Bunnyman near Fairfax County, known as Bunnyman Bridge. There are so many stories of the Goatman and where it is located. There are even some folk songs about this mysterious creature. Some people have witnessed the Goatman himself, and some have just made up some stories. It was late in October, and fall had brought a chill to the air throughout the Ozarks. A group of young fur trappers had spent the day in the woods, hoping to gather enough game for food and enough pelts to trade with other settlers in the area. Tired and hungry from the long, hard day, the group was glad to finally see their camp on the horizon. They were just about to settle around the fire to a dinner of warm soup when they heard a sound that shook them to their cores. A terrifying cry echoed through the forest, and each man jumped at the ready to defend himself from whatever lurked just beyond the tree line. Unsure of what they heard, murmurs reverberated through the group as they wondered aloud if a woman or child was in trouble or an animal had suffered some kind of horrible injury. The silence that followed the blood-curdling scream was nearly as terrifying. Not only had the scream ceased as suddenly as it had begun, but every bird, bug, and forest critter fell into a deafening silence unlike any of the men had ever heard. No one moved as their eyes darted from one to another. Unsure of what they were waiting for, one man finally reached for his rifle, followed quickly by the others. The men gathered as a group and collectively began to inch closer to the woods. The sound of their breathing and the rapid beating of their hearts are all that could be heard. As they moved under the canopy of the trees, the cry came again, and the men were face to face with a ferocious beast. Slinking in front of them was a large black creature. Although its long snout was similar in shape to a wolf or a dog, the men would later agree that the creature was more cat-like in shape and demeanor. The glowing red eyes and horns that adorned its head were demonic and terrifying. As the men turned to run toward camp, the creature returned to the woods, never to be seen or heard from again. At least not by this group. This is a version of a backyard fire and ghost story session that tells the story of the Ozark Howler. The Ozark Howler, also known as the Ozark Black Howler, the Hoo-Hoo, the Nightshade Bear, Wampus Cat, Booger Cat, Bear Cat, and the Devil Cat, is a legendary creature that is purported to live in remote areas in the Ozarks. Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas are the 4 states that make up the Ozark area and have the most sightings of the howler. It is typically described as being around the size of a bear with a thick body, stocky legs, black shaggy hair, and having prominent horns. Most agree that it is either black or dark in color. Its cry is often described as being a combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's bugle. Skeptics claim that it's an eastern cougar, a black bear, or some kind of wolf or feral hound. The howl, as you might expect, is the hallmark of the Ozark Howler. Its sound has been described as very deep and guttural, as well as a high-pitched howl. Others have said that it's the most unearthly scream and half-human. One of the most common descriptions of the sound is like the screams of a woman. Those who have heard the screams pierce the night never forget the chill that ran up their spine and feeling of dread that washed over them. Some claim that the sounds are made by animals commonly found in the region. They point to the screams and howls of animals like the red fox, fisher cat, and even fighting raccoons. This creature has origin tales from Arkansas to Missouri and back, all pointing to the 1800s as its true origin date. Many believe this was a hoax to fool the cryptid community from early American folklore, while others have determined the howlers real. Some claim this is a lost branch of the mountain lion line mixed with the unknown big cat breed. This missing link from howler to a big cat has scientists scrambling to match the species and close this unknown link. Some legends state the Howler to be a growling demon stalking its prey across the country or mountainsides. Others report the Howler appearing in the distance just for a look at the passerbys before disappearing again. The 1800s version of the Howler tell of people being attacked and killed, with recent tales to match. Most sightings have become passive walk-bys with some strange howling or growling. According to one tale, Daniel Boone, over 80 years old at that time, killed the Howler while on a hunting trip near the Platte River. Daniel Boone was an American pioneer and frontiersman whose exploits made him one of the first folk heroes of the United States. Boone became famous for his exploration and settlement of what is now Kentucky, which was then beyond the western borders of the 13 colonies. Legends say Boone fired a few shots at the creature. Some say he took it home as a trophy, but little evidence supports that. Sightings have been officially recorded since the 1950s, though many Ozark families can pass on stories of their parents and grandparents experiencing the chill of seeing the Ozark Howler well before that time. Between 2005 and 2010, the Howler was spotted several times. A family living north of Van Buren in the Boston Mountains of Crawford County set out trail camps after spotting what they believed was a cougar. The images they supplied to a Fort Smith's television station appeared to show a big cat similar to a cougar or a mountain lion. The problem is that wildlife officials maintain there is not a breeding population of cougars left in Arkansas. They do concede that it is possible there might be individual big cats living in the mountains, pointing out they likely were once held as pets but escaped or were turned loose by their owners. At roughly the same time as the Crawford County sightings, similar reports originated from across the border in eastern Oklahoma. Those sightings revolve around large dark cats seen moving through the mountains. Other reports from near Dardanelle in the Arkansas River Valley describe strange sounds in the night similar to the laugh or bark of a hyena. From higher elevations, witnesses reported seeing what they described as a large ducky cat. Adding further confusion to all of this is the fact that some researchers believe the whole Arkansas Howler legend is a hoax created by an individual intent on exposing what he considered the outlandishness of the Chupacabra reports that began making their rounds on the internet in the late 1990s. Scientists have spent years researching breeding populations of big cats in the Ozark area, as well as thermal imagery in hopes of catching a reading of this creature. Many large-scale efforts have been brought to sighting locations in multiple states, only turning up minor evidence the Howler could have been there. Paw prints and dark hairs are the only traces past blurred-out pictures and local tales. This, however, does not stop locals, researchers, and cryptid hunters from searching out the Howler. Many still comb the area in hopes of seeing this creature. The Beast of Bladenboro refers to a creature responsible for a string of deaths amongst Bladenboro, North Carolina animals in the winter of 1953 to 1954. According to witnesses and trackers, it was likely a wild cat, but its identity was never confirmed. According to reports, the animal commonly crushed or decapitated its victims, which were mostly dogs. Bladenboro is a small community surrounded by pine forests and swamps at the southeastern edge of the North Carolina Piedmont. It was also the setting for the greatest monster flap North Carolina has ever seen. The story begins in Bladen County in the town of Clarkton. On December 29, 1953, a local woman heard her neighbor's dogs barking and then whimpering. When she went out to investigate, she saw a large cat-like creature skulk off into the darkness. That was the first sighting of the Beast of Bladenboro. 2 days later, the creature would strike. On New Year's Eve, Bladenboro Police Chief Roy Forrest was called out to the farm of Woody Storm. 2 of Storm's dogs have been killed by something large and powerful. What's strange, though, and why he decided to call the police was the strange fact that both of his dead dogs have been completely drained of their blood. Stumped, Chief Forrest left the farm. It wouldn't be long before the station was inundated with calls from all over Bladenboro claiming their dogs had gone missing or been viciously attacked. Soon enough, Chief Forrest had his own sighting. While at his service station, he watched a dog in front of his own eyes be attacked by a large creature and dragged into the woods. Some people believed the creature was a panther. Others believed it was a small malformed bear. And others believed it was a creature that the world was not familiar with. 2 more dogs were discovered on January 1st, and this had also been drained of blood. As the reporters continued to mount, Chief Forrest decided to call in a team of professional hunters to track the animal. A group of hunters from Wilmington spent the night tracking the creature for 3 miles around swampland. According to them, the tracks showed claws at least an inch long and indicated an 80-pound to 90-pound animal. The beast's circling movement suggested it might have had offspring or a mate nearby, the hunters said. On January 5th, C.E. Kinslaw headed outside in the middle of the night because she had heard the sound of dogs whimpering. Upon opening the door, a large cat-like creature began to rush towards her. She screamed, which roused her husband, and he scrambled to get outside. The shouting and sudden movements were apparently enough to spook the creature, and the Kinslaws went back to bed, shaken up but unharmed. Newspapers quickly picked up the story of the Kinslaws and of Bladenboro's beast problem. The story sent the townspeople deeper into a flurry, and Eve Butler, who was a young man in town at that time, said, "Nighttime was the feared time around these parts." As the sun set, the entire community on the west side of town went indoors and didn't come out unless necessary. On January 13th, taking an unusually large bobcat that had been trapped by a local farmer, 2 men hung it up a flagpole in the center of town. They posted a sign underneath stating, "This is the Beast of Bladenboro." After a week or so, things settled back to normal. The hunters left town, and the reports of killings stopped coming in. Whatever the Beast of Bladenboro was, it had vanished back into the night and the swamps from where it had first emerged. Before I begin this narration, let me apologize in advance for any mispronounced words. If you hear a word I mispronounced and you know how to say it correctly, please feel free to comment below. Thank you for understanding. Kuchisake Onna, also known as Lift-Mouthed Woman, is a malevolent figure in Japanese urban legends and folklore. Described as the malicious spirit or onryo of a woman, she partially covers her face with a mask or other item and carries some sort of a sharp object. According to legend, Kuchisake Onna was a woman who was mutilated during her life, with her mouth being slit from ear to ear. In some versions of the story, Kuchisake Onna was the adulterous wife or concubine of a samurai during her life. As punishment for her infidelity, her husband sliced the corners of her mouth from ear to ear. Other versions of the tale include that her mouth was mutilated during a medical or dental procedure, that she was mutilated by a woman who was jealous of her beauty, or that her mouth is filled with numerous sharp teeth. After her death, the woman returned as a vengeful spirit, or onryo. As an onryo, she covers her mouth with a cloth mask, often specified as a surgical mask, or in some iterations, a hand fan or handkerchief. She also carries a sharp instrument with her, which has been described as a knife, a machete, a scythe, or a large pair of scissors. A version of the story states that a child in Japan was walking home from school one evening. The friends who usually walked with her had already gone home, but she was only 1 street away from her house. She saw a young woman walking towards her wearing a surgical mask, like those that many Japanese people use to protect themselves from smog and diseases. She stopped in front of the child and leaned down towards her. The child was not worried as she seemed friendly enough. "Where are you going?" the woman asked. "I'm going home from school. My house is just down the road there." Do you think I'm beautiful? Came the unexpected question. The girl politely, if a little concerned, said yes. The woman then asked as she removed the mask. How about now? The girl was horrified by her appearance, but she had been brought up to be always polite, so she told her that she still looked beautiful. Then the terrifying figure disappeared. The next day at school, the girl told her friends what she had seen, and they immediately recognized the story. They told her that the woman had appeared to many girls over the years, but not all of them had been so lucky. If she hadn't said the right thing, the woman would have cut the same terrible smile into the girl's own face with a pair of scissors and condemned her to roam the streets in a mask. The shocked girl did not walk home alone again for a very long time. An individual can survive an encounter with Kuchisake Onna by using one of several methods. In some versions of the legend, Kuchisake Onna will leave the potential victim alone if they answer yes to both of her questions. Though in other versions, she will visit the individual's residence later that night and murder the person while sleeping. Other survival tactics include replying to Kuchisake Onna's question by describing her appearance as average, giving the individual enough time to run away, distracting her by giving or throwing money or hard candies, particularly the kind of candy known as bekoame, made of caramelized sugar, in her direction, as she will stop to pick them up, or by saying the word pomade 3 times. Black-eyed children, or black-eyed kids, are an American contemporary legend of paranormal creatures that resemble children between ages 6 and 16 with pale skin and black eyes who are reportedly seen hitchhiking or panhandling, or are encountered on doorsteps of residential homes. A dozen of stories keep circulating, all following a very similar pattern. Kids with eyes completely blacked out appear at people's home or vehicle, knock on the door, and then insist upon getting inside. Anyone who encountered them has almost immediately felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Besides blacked out eyes, these children typically appear normal. Sometimes, their attire seems outdated. In extremely unusual instances, people have reported encountering creatures with talon-like feet. People started hearing about these stories since the 1980s. This story first appeared in the early days of the internet, posted on a message board. A young professional in Midwestern American town had gone to pick up some supplies from a late-night convenience store. After leaving the shop, he got into his car and prepared to drive off when he heard a knock at the window. Standing there were 2 small boys, both quite young and wearing hoods. He wound the window down to see what they wanted and instantly felt that something was not quite right with his children, who were asking him where he lived. He wasn't exactly scared, but for some reason, he lied and said that he lived on the opposite side of the town. They told him that was where they lived as well and they needed a lift home because they had missed their bus. At that point, it was past 10 p.m., and the man was aware that the buses had stopped running a few hours previously. What were they doing out at this time on their own? The boys asked if he was going to let them in, saying that they were getting hungry, and one of them put his hand on the door handle, which the man quickly locked from the inside. The taller of the pair said that they were only kids, insisting, We're not going to do anything bad, but we can't get in the car unless you ask us. This kind of talk alarmed the driver. He started the car, but they knocked again. And he wondered whether leaving kids of that age alone in the dark would be the right thing to do. Then he noticed their eyes. Their eyeballs were totally black with no visible iris, as if they were full of jet black ink. You need to let us in. We can't come in unless you ask us. You can't leave us out here. They repeated. He ignored them and sped off, and as he looked back in his mirrors, he saw that they had disappeared. Shaken by this incident, he posted a description on a local message board, and it wasn't long before his story was picked up nationwide. Several other sightings were reported up and down the country, all of them involving young children knocking on doors and windows of cars and houses, asking to be let in for food and becoming quietly insistent when they were denied access. Nobody knows what would happen if you beckoned them inside because the only people who did were sadly unable to tell the tale. Another version goes like this. In the snowy town within the middle of nowhere of Vermont, an elderly couple heard the sound of 3 loud knocks on their door. They opened the door and saw 2 children, a boy and a girl. Parents will be here soon. May we come in? The children did not make eye contact and just stood there in the doorway. The elderly couple were hesitant, but after a while, they let the boy and girl inside. The kids settled on the couch while the wife made some hot cocoa and the husband asked them questions that went unanswered. The wife returned and noticed that her cat was scared and angry with the children. May we please use the restroom? The wife looked at the kids and she finally saw them. The children's eyes were as black as the starless universe. She directed them to the bathroom and returned to her husband, who was covering his face with his hand. Did you see their eyes? The husband then showed her his hand full of blood from a nosebleed. The power suddenly went out and the house turned as dark as the kids' eyes. The wife headed to the restroom and was confronted by the voice of the kids at the end of the hall uttering, "Our parents are here!" The kids then exited the house, leaving the door wide open. The wife then noticed that there were 2 men at the end of the driveway. The men were very tall and slender. The wife waved but did not receive the same friendly gesture. The 2 men and children then drove away together in one car. The power then came back on a little later after the kids left. Throughout the next week, weird things happened in the house. 3 out of 4 cats went missing and the 4th had been found dead in the pool of its blood. The husband continued to have nosebleeds and finally went to the doctor where he was diagnosed with a very aggressive skin cancer. Nowadays, people still claim to see the black-eyed children when driving late at night down an empty road or outside of their window late at night, or even lurking in the shadows of their room. Many people have reported seeing the black-eyed children standing in the corner of their room during their episodes of sleep paralysis, or even waking up in the middle of the night because they sensed someone was watching them, and in the shadows were these children.
Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twysted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!